silent singer. Can submission be powerful? As I've spoken about many times, I'm one of those weirdos who likes bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism. And when I came to BDSM many, many years ago, it was because I was coming from the perspective of being in a very vanilla relationship where I often didn't feel empowered. And as somebody who has had their consent taken from them many times, BDSM was interesting to me because of the standardization of consent and the way that consent is something that can always be revoked, and the way that we are supposed to communicate these things, discuss these things, and actually respect them. BDSM has been incredibly empowering for me personally, and that's part of why it is part of my lifestyle. I certainly respect that not everyone has had that experience with BDSM, and if you follow me on here, you've heard me talk about the bad aspects that come with BDSM many times. One of my most popular videos is a review of 50 Shades of Grey. Go check that out if you want to sort of understand the basis of that. But BDSM is still something that for me is very, very important, and mostly because of how empowered I feel as a submissive. Now, I bring that up because that actually is going to be at the heart of the conversation we're going to be having today about Sabrina Carpenter's new album, because a lot of people are saying that this album cover sets women back, and part of that reason is because of the position that she's playing in, which seems to be quite submissive. So as a submissive, I felt that I would come here and share my thoughts about that and so much more. But as per usual, I'm getting ahead of myself yet again. Hi, my name is katblaque, and I like to think that I make content for introspective hot people. And if you're here, I'll assume that's you. And if you're brand new here, you know exactly what to do if this video pleases you. You click my button and join me right here on the channel. So a lot of you guys have asked me what my opinion of Sabrina Carpenter's new album cover is. And before we get into that, I want to really quickly establish one thing about katblaque. I was raised very Christian, and one of the things that has stuck with me throughout my entire life is because I was not raised with secular media and with the idea of celebrity and adoring celebrity, I am not a person who is very celebrity focused. You know, I like Sabrina Carpenter's music, the bit that I've heard. I think she's just about as good as any other pop star. I've enjoyed a lot of her costuming. I've enjoyed a lot of her songs and her vibe. I think she's a very beautiful girl, but I'm not a fan. And I'm not a fan really of most celebrities. And I kind of see a lot of these conversations as always sort of missing the point that in a situation where people are trying to sell you something, there's always going to be, you know, a little bit of bullshit, just a little bit of bullshit. Even though it is an album cover that I'm sure is self-expressive, it's about selling you something. And for me, that is always kind of the way that I enter into these conversations, because frankly, as a person who isn't in a parasocial relationship with some of these celebrities, I think I just kind of see it a lot more. And personally for me, you can look at my collection of music and I am positive you can find some problematic stuff in it. I am not somebody who necessarily believes in throwing the baby out. So this is not going to be a conversation that concludes in everything XYZ person does is bad. It's just going to be me sharing my thoughts just basically on the surface of this, because I do think this is a very interesting conversation to have right now. And I really wanted to give you guys some of my thoughts, especially as a submissive. So the name of her new album is Man's Best Friend, and this is the cover. In this picture, she is on her knees with one of her hands with a wedding ring in full display, holding on to a man who's in a suit who is holding on to her hair. And there's a lot of people who looked at this picture and are basically saying that it's bringing women back. And then there is another picture that is a close-up of a dog collar that says man's best friend. Very, very cute, actually. So one of the things I kind of appreciated about this particular story is that I really do feel a little bit like there's a lot of different ways to interpret this image. So in my video about Shannon Sharpe, I talk a little bit about this, but something that I've recently had to make peace with is the fact that my entry point into BDSM is very different from a lot of men's entry point into BDSM. What I mean by that is a lot of times women come into BDSM because of consent, right? For the reasons that I mentioned, right? Consent for a lot of women is something that we often feel men don't respect. And so there's something that is really nice about being in a practice where men are supposed to respect consent. And so for me, when I come to BDSM, that's kind of the focus. I'm really excited about the idea of power exchange and the idea that I'm going to be giving my power to a man who respects me, right? But men, I've discovered, don't really have that same entry point. A lot of men come into BDSM from BDSM porn, and a lot of times they come into BDSM because they want to standardize control. For them, it's not so much about consent and the exchange of power. For a lot of men, it is about sort of reinforcing these standard patriarchal structures that are very common in our vanilla world, but are now standardized within the context of BDSM. And for me, that's something that really stands out a little bit in this particular image, because there are different ways to interpret this. I don't necessarily think that some of the women, especially who are looking at this picture and saying that it's misogynistic, are pulling that from nowhere. And I want to make it clear before I get further into this video, I am probably going to have ideas in this video that conflict because I don't necessarily have one reading of this, right? Because again, for me, the thing about celebrities is they're always trying to sell you something. And so art being kind of vague and open-ended and being interpreted different ways could be very useful as a sales tool.
With the Sabrina Carpenter album cover, I think what people need to kind of understand is that feminism does not have a one-size-fits-all answer for this topic. This topic about sex, sexualization, submissiveness in sex, all these things have a very complicated relationship to feminism. Not every feminist agrees on this topic. If you look at feminist literature, this has always been contentious, especially if you even go into like radical feminism, lesbianism as like a feminist ideology, feminism in general. We have a very complicated relationship as feminists to this conversation. And I think the only way to have it in good faith is to earnestly come to the table understanding that there is not going to be a one-size-fits-all answer to how people are going to feel about this particular topic.
I'll tell you the first thought that I had looking at this. So the very first thing that I noticed when I looked at this image of Sabrina Carpenter on her knees is that she's wearing a full face of makeup. Now that might not seem like a big deal to you, but a lot of men are not a fan of this full face of makeup look. And sometimes it's funny to talk about this because a lot of times when men say they don't like makeup, what they really mean is they don't like eyeliner. A lot of times men will say they like girls who don't wear makeup, but they'll show a picture of a woman in a full beat, right? It's just a full beat without eyeliner. But when I look at this picture of her, she is fully beat to the gods, right? And for me personally, that indicates choice, because a lot of men are not a fan of that. Dominant men who want submissive women, they're less so interested in a full face of makeup. A lot of men are attracted to the sort of raw look of your skin, right? They don't really want like full face. So for me, when I interpret this picture, I think this is a woman who put herself together a certain way. She chose her outfit, she chose her makeup, and she's deciding to submit to a man. And here's the thing. For me, deciding to be submissive is a huge cathartic choice that I make, right? Why is that? Because especially for someone like me, I'm not often granted the ability to be seen as someone who is submissive, right? I often have to be the more forward person in my daily life because if I'm not, people may take advantage of me, right? And so choosing to be submissive, especially knowing how dangerous that could be for me, for certain people, that is such a decided choice that I make because I enjoy it, right? And because I like it, right? Because it's something that I actually want to do. And I haven't really loved how sometimes when we have conversations about this sort of thing, people often want to take away the agency from women. They want to say that women who perform like this are just completely brainwashed by patriarchy and can't possibly understand what they're doing. Every single time that they do something like this, they're reinforcing patriarchy, this and this and that. I don't really agree with that because personally for me, submission is not gendered. Submission is not something that I do because I'm a woman. It's something that I do because I like it.
Is she acting male-centered, or are you reacting purity-centered? And with no shame, no anything to those that aren't sexually active or like are waiting until marriage or like whatever. Why are the only acceptable ways for a woman to express herself and have worth sexually are absently? So again, is it demure, maidenly, mindful, angelic virgin, or as a dominatrix?
Yep, let's talk about it. Let's talk
as
about
one,
it.
like the man on the leash. Why are those the only two options?
Yep.
Women fuck.
Yes. Yes.
Women have sex and they fuck and they like it.
Yes. Yes.
Doesn't make you not a woman if you don't, but it also doesn't make you less of a woman or less of a person or of less worth if you have sex. Like, it's when as a society are we gonna accept that? And it's okay that they fuck men. Happy Pride, let's not forget.
And also because I enjoy pain, right? For me personally, that's just like a physical source of enjoyment that I like to explore with my partners who I have that kind of relationship with. So for me, it's really a conscious choice, right? But then we have that word, right? Choice. And that's kind of where I start to go in a different direction. Because, of course, we have to talk about whether or not we are consciously making these choices, right? I think that it is very easy in this society to perform submission as a woman and be rewarded for it. There's a lot of things pressuring you to be submissive. You listen to these podcasts and all they're talking about is how women need to be more submissive. And we see the way that our country is going right now, where men are indeed trying to subjugate women in a very real and serious way. They are indeed trying to make it so that women no longer have options to be anything other than a submissive housewife. They are trying to double down on that, and Donald Trump is indeed trying to promise, especially young men, that if they just do the right thing, if they just work with him, they're going to be able to gain access to submissive women who are willing to service them. And I wish I was exaggerating. And you know, the thing is, I think that's kind of why this is such a hard image to register, right? Because on one hand, I do want to celebrate and respect the fact that women can choose to be submissive. Women can indeed engage in this behavior consensually with a full understanding of what they're doing, right? On the other hand, like I said earlier, they're trying to sell, right? Sabrina Carpenter is trying to sell, and it's very clear, to me at least, that there are plenty of people who are going to look at this image and they might not immediately get all of the context that I get and think, oh, this is a woman choosing to do this. They're just going to see a woman subjugating herself to a man. In a way, I think it can be read different ways, and I actually think that might be by choice. Also, I wanted to look at her Rolling Stone cover, and I think she looks so cute in this cover. She looks so good. But you know, it's one of those things where, okay, I'm looking at this right now. She looks beautiful, right? She looks so beautiful. And there's a way of looking at this, right? There's a way of looking at this where you're saying, okay, this is an empowered woman, right? She's an empowered woman. She's naked because she wants to be. She's got her hookah next to her. You know, she's vibing. She's doing her own thing, her body, her rules, all that. And I think all of that is not an inaccurate read. But also, she is a blonde woman with, you know, well, I think her wig is blonde. I don't think she actually is blonde, but she is a blonde woman with blue eyes in a Trump era. There are a lot of people who are, of course, going to look at this and just see a beautiful naked woman who fits into white beauty standards, right? And that's obviously gonna sell. And that's kind of the interesting thing to me about all of this, right? You really can look at stuff like this and have more than one interpretation. I will say that something that I have noticed is we're seeing a lot more advertisement like this. I don't know the name of this influencer. I want to say her name may be Alex Earl. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But she did a Carl's Jr. commercial, and it was like one of those Carl's Jr. commercials where, you know, the woman is naked and she's eating a burger and it's spilling all over her body and this and this and that. And you could look at that in a similar way. You could look at it and say, wow, she's an empowered woman standing up for her sexuality, embracing herself, being confident and sexy. And also, she's a thin white woman selling burgers, right? Like, you really can look at it two different ways. And that's kind of the thing that I think makes some of this hard. I definitely think that it's a sign of where we are that we're seeing more advertisement like this. I think that that's kind of a silly thing to ignore.
It would be incredibly culturally blind and odd for Sabrina Carpenter's team to not have recognized that this is going to be a controversial image, which is probably exactly what they want.
It's intentional.
What I find odd, and a lot of other people are finding odd, is that Sabrina Carpenter has never presented herself as being particularly regressive or conservative in her ideas of gender roles. So it's a little odd, unless it's ironic. And of course, that's where a lot of people have jumped to. Well, it must be ironic. But if you look at Sabrina Carpenter's music, most of it is about being pretty for a man and the effect that prettiness has on the man, how she thinks the man reflects on her in public, how much the man misses her when she's gone, how she's better than his last woman. And honestly, that's pretty standard for pop music. But when you pair it with an image of a woman being totally subservient to a man, it doesn't come across as ironic. It comes across as taking it one more step further.
I did watch Anthony Fantano's coverage of this, and apparently some of her lyrics speak quite frequently about her attempting to get into relationships like this that fail. And that's something that is really interesting to me because that is also my experience, right? Like, I personally, as an aside, will go over this real quick. As you guys know, I'm polyamorous. My longest standing partner, Nathan, is the one who introduced me to BDSM. And when I came to Los Angeles, I came out here with the expectation that I would easily be able to find a dominant man who was good at the thing and respected women and all this other shit. And I have had the hardest time finding a well-adjusted, respectful, not transphobic, not racist dom. I mean, it is comical, honestly, how hard it's been to find like a decent dude out here. It is so common for women who want to be submissive to desire dominant men who have no understanding of what to do with that power. And in some scenarios, some submissives basically end up servicing themselves because they have this expectation of the way that that relationship is supposed to go in their heads, but then they run into people who are just patriarchal misogynists who are hiding their abuse behind BDSM. That's something I talk a lot about in my Shannon Sharp video. And in a lot of videos I've talked about with BDSM, that's kind of been a central issue because that's been my observation. My observation is that while there are a lot of men who are interested in BDSM, while there are a lot of dominant men who want submissive women, there are also a lot of men who don't quite know what they're doing. And so it is fairly common for women to come out and really, really want a positive BDSM dynamic that actually doesn't end up going anywhere because of just how shitty these dudes are. She has just released Man-Child, and in the music video, you very clearly get the sense that what she's talking about is desiring this type of relationship, jumping from relationship to relationship, falling into certain patterns, recognizing that it's not working out, but always sort of attracting the same sort of man and repeating a cycle that is unhelpful to her. And honestly, I think that is a great representation of the folly of being a woman who wants to be in a submissive relationship. A lot of times when you're a woman, you're kind of raised with this idea of men, right? You're sort of primed to believe a lot of fantastical, mythological things about men, and about how if you just play these roles or have these relationships, certain types of things will happen. But then, you get into these relationships and it doesn't go that way. And as it turns out, one of the side effects of misogyny is that there's an incredible amount of propaganda about men and what these relationships actually look like. So my interpretation, though I could be reaching, is that that's just part of what this is all about. It's all supposed to be paradoxical and reflective of just how hard it is to be in these relationships, because they aren't often relationships that work with a lot of especially modern men. Let's look at the lyrics really quickly. You said your phone was broken, just forgot to charge it. Your whole outfit you're wearing, God, I hope it's ironic. Did you just say you're finished? Didn't even know we started. It's all just so familiar, baby. What do you call it? She's describing these relationships where she's buying into what men are saying, but consistently it turns out not to work out the way that it was presented to her. What is this pattern? Why is it so familiar? And that's the thing. Like, sometimes you end up connecting with men where you're just really repeating patterns, right? And that's something that I had to realize in myself. Being used to dating very conservative men, frankly, I had to recognize at a certain point that there were patterns I was falling into, because there were parts of those relationships that I didn't really let go of, negative things that I had bought into about what relationships were supposed to look like that I hadn't really let go of. And I think that that's sort of what a lot of women go through. You get this propaganda about marriage and about relationships and about weddings and children and da-da-da-da. It just never goes the way that it's sold to you, right? Stupid, or maybe it's slow, maybe it's useless, but there's a cuter word for it, I know. Man-child, why do you always come running to me? Fuck my life. Won't you let an innocent woman be? Never heard of self-care? Half your brain just ain't there. Man-child, why you always come a-running, taking all of my lovin' from me, right? And yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is like, a lot of times you're in relationships with men and they're taking, and you're there playing the role that you think you're supposed to play, but it's not really feeding you. Going back to the first section, right? Oh, you're finished? I didn't even know we started. Her pleasure is not centered. She's here, she's compliant, she wants to be in these relationships, but they're not satisfactory. In all reality, they're not satisfactory. And I don't know if anyone else goes through this, but I've definitely been in relationships where one of the ways I coped with getting less than what I wanted was saying, oh, okay, he's just stupid. He's just stupid. He doesn't know no better. That sort of like way you end up coping with these relationships not working well, because believing that maybe something you're doing or a pattern that you're falling into might be maladaptive would be, too much. Why so sexy if so dumb? And how survive the earth so long? If I'm not there, I won't get done. I choose to blame your mom. Oof da. Oof da. I dated a mommy's boy. Oh my God, I dated a mommy's boy. I dated a guy where I would cook dinner and he would pretty regularly come home with a pot of pasta that his mom made. And mind you, back then, this was like me trying to be what I thought I was supposed to be in a relationship. And, at the end of the day, he was just so connected to that, he was so connected to his mom and stuff. And yeah, she really spoiled him, and he was a mama's boy, and that was probably one of the things that ruined our relationship, I'm being honest. Oh, I like my boys playing hard to get, and I like my men incompetent. And I swear they choose me, I'm not choosing them. Amen, amen. Oh, I like my boys playing hard to get, play hard to get, and I like my men all incompetent. And I swear they choose me, I'm not choosing them. Amen, amen, amen. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing too, is like, a lot of times you feel like you're supposed to be chosen. And sometimes when you get chosen, you lose all sense, right? At least that's what it was like for me in my relationship with my ex, right? Like, I was for the longest time so tickled by the fact that he chose me that I allowed myself to ignore what I wanted, what I needed, what I was interested in. It was all about satisfying him. I was in that relationship for 6 years. And when I left that relationship, I left a completely different person than the person I was when I met him. I'm now a little bit more back to my form, but when I started dating him, I changed so much because I was so enthralled by the idea that he chose me. And at the end of the day, that only really carries but so much weight, right? If you're not happy, if you're not satisfied, that should be something that you address. But you're incentivized not to. You're incentivized to be submissive, to be agreeable, to accept it, and not quite speak up for yourself. And I kind of get that that's kind of what this is about a little bit. Okay, I'm looking at the man's best friend vinyl art, and it is her on the bed with an older man. It looks like an older man because he's got a little bit of gray in his hair at her feet. And you know, that's an interesting one because there's actually a couple of different ways to look at this image, right? In this image, he almost looks a little subservient, right? He almost looks a little bit like he is doting on her. But at the same time, that also doesn't mean that he's not the dom, right? There's a lot of different types of doms. There's a lot of different ways that men express domination. And one of the ways that men can express domination is by being more of a nurturing dom. I tend to like this kind of dominant, honestly. And that's kind of what I get from this image, right? He's looking at her. She's putting her hands up on the bedpost, but she's not actually tied there. She's not actually tied there. She's not actually kept there. She's there, but she's not kept there, right? She's putting her hands up intentionally by choice. Now, I'm someone who loves to be tied up. I am someone who loves to be tied up, and rope, if done right, is more of a game of tension than it is actually bonding you into place. Rope, if done correctly, is not actually trapping you. It may be giving you the sensation of being trapped, but it's not actually trapping you. And that's something that I had to realize, that a lot of times this stuff, it's more about feeling like you're there than actually being held back there, right? And so I think it's really interesting that in this picture, she's not actually kept there. She's there consensually because she wants to be. Again, that's kind of the interpretation that I get. So it looks like the picture, the vinyl, is a reference to Lolita. Yeah, the Lolita stuff, not great. Gotta say, not great.
As a counter to this, if she had wanted to do an ironic cover, okay? If she had wanted to sort of complain about the male gaze and about how she feels sometimes that her art and her person is subservient to male consumption. Let's take the song Espresso. That is the thing that you consume, right? She could have so easily riffed on this theme. Like, that's already been done before, but she is serving him coffee. Like, you could have done an espresso riff on this so easily. Like, I don't know, spitballing. She could have been handing him down the coffee from the bed while he's on the floor. If she wanted to get really edgy with it, there is a very famous, incredibly controversial cover to a men's magazine that came out, I want to say, in the late 70s. And it featured a pair of women's legs sticking out of a meat grinder. If you know, you know. This is an incredibly controversial cover. But the idea was, you know, like that women are for consumption in some way. She could have put herself in the espresso cup while a man is drinking it if she wanted to, like, make some kind of commentary about how men consume women.
Now, there's an interesting conversation to be had here because a lot of people were bringing up Madonna in this debate about whether or not this was degrading towards women. A lot of people were saying that Madonna would never degrade herself this way. And a lot of that has to do with the popular images that came from Madonna's coffee table book forever ago, where a lot of those images were of her in a position where she was indeed the dominant woman in control. But you know, while there are plenty of images that portray her as dominant, there are also several that portray her as quite submissive. And I think it's worth pointing out that these are presented side by side. They're presented next to each other within the same book, because that is, for a lot of people, the duality of their BDSM. Like, a lot of people are switchy. A lot of people like to be on both ends of the spectrum. I'm not one of those people personally, but I know that there are people who enjoy both. And yeah, I guess for a lot of women, being in the dominant role is more overtly powerful, right? It is more overtly powerful to be portrayed as the dominant one in the relationship. But I think for a lot of people who understand these things in this way, they are definitely having a little bit of an outsider perspective. And I don't mean to say any of that in a condescending way or in a way that makes, you know, oh my God, I'm so kinky and you're not. What I mean is that just because a woman is dominant does not mean that the man who she's doing a scene with is not in control or the one who is in charge, right? Usually a dom is only going as far as the submissive is allowing, right? So while a woman wearing leather can look to the outside, this is a powerful woman subverting patriarchy and taking on the role of dominance. I think in all reality, a lot of people don't often understand that quite frequently that is at the direction of the submissive who wants to experience something like that. So in so many ways, this dom, though the outside image is that she is the one dominating and being serviced, is actually the one doing the servicing. And that's kind of the interesting layer of BDSM that people don't often understand.
I am a mother of 4 girls. 2 of them are teenagers, young teenagers. And I just can't help but feel a bit sad for what is happening in the world right now for women, with the likes of Bonnie Blue, with this sort of imagery. And I've seen other people's take on it, saying that this is what Sabrina Carpenter wanted. She wants to spark conversation by releasing this. But I just think for the young girls who are her fans, who are going to be seeing this, they are not going to, I don't think, look deeply into it like that. They're just going to take the image for what it is. It's called Man's Best Friend. She's being led along by her hair. And I don't know about you, but I don't want my daughters seeing this and thinking that this is normal or okay or just an everyday image that they are viewing.
The thing that fascinates me sometimes about this particular conversation, even though it's a conversation that I definitely understand, is that I think parents need to start being more involved in what their children are looking at. Because if this was a billboard, and I haven't seen any of these on billboards recently. So if this was on a billboard, okay, maybe I would have a bit more to say. But I think you have to try to find it. First of all, Sabrina Carpenter makes a lot of music about sex. I actually don't understand why parents let their kids listen to Sabrina Carpenter when she makes so much music about sex. To me, that is odd. But again, I was raised very sheltered. So maybe that's where I don't really understand. My parents made a point of making sure for as long as they could that I didn't get into secular media or see sexual things before I was ready to see them. I think that a lot of parents don't want that degree of responsibility. So they expect people like Sabrina Carpenter to remain chaste and to not really be a bad representative. But I think actually you can teach your children to admire people who don't do these things. I think it's actually quite easy to do that. At the same time, one of the thoughts I've been having recently is we're all having these conversations about women's empowerment and women's, ability to choose and things like that. And that's something that we've been having a conversation with for decades, if you're my age, right? If you're younger than that, you're coming into a time where men are more openly misogynistic, women are more objectified than they've probably ever been in recent history. There are way more options for if you're a young girl to get into sex work online, and it's kind of expected. Like, I talk about this in my video that I made about the Bop House, but people always assume that I am an OnlyFans model. And it's very interesting because, yeah, I'm a former sex worker, but like, I was a former sex worker when I was 19. What's 35 minus 19? I'm not good at math. It's been a really long time since I've done sex work, right? So it's weird that that's the expectation, but it is such a common thing that it's not terribly uncommon to meet young women who make their money through sex work, right? Now, I personally am not anti-sex work. I don't think that doing sex work is a bad thing, but I do think about how a lot of young girls are seeing what's going on right now. I also kind of think that some of the reactions some people are having is indicative of our more conservative era. This is not the first time that people have taken risque pictures, but I do think it's worth thinking about the times in our society when we do see images like this. I don't think that it can really be discounted that misogyny is returning in big form, that women are indeed being objectified in a way that we weren't quite objectifying them 10 years ago. We had this moment in time where we said, you know what, we're not going to do the Carl's Jr. commercials. And I do not think that it's a coincidence that during a time when we are really starting to have conversations about just how many rights women should have, that we're starting to see an uptick in the objectification of women in a very large and loud way. Yeah, I think there's so many different ways to look at this album cover, and I'm definitely not in full disagreement with people who look at this and say, this is misogynistic, it's a bad representation for women, and it's setting a bad precedent. I do think that right now is an interesting time for this, but I do get the impression, at least from Man-Child, that this is definitely more so tongue-in-cheek, ironic, a criticism of these types of relationships, a satirism of these types of relationships. And to me, that's worth talking about, especially if we're entering into an era where we are supposed to admire these dynamics. Unfortunately, the reality of so many women who end up falling into the trad wife thing is that you end up giving your life to a man for many, many years. You submit to him, you give him everything you need, you forgo work, you don't do anything you aren't supposed to do, and he could just up and leave, and you ain't got nothing for yourself. And there's too many women who are in that position where they've spent the past 20 years raising kids, you know, taking care of a man, and then that man could just up and decide one day that he wants nothing to do with you, and you're stuck taking care of it all. And I think that that is something that we should be talking about as we sort of see the more trad wife stuff get pushed on women, because I think at this current point, we've had enough evidence of that not always panning out that it's worth talking about. I've been working on a video about the 4B movement and trad wives for quite some time, and it keeps changing. You know, it just continuously changes the script that I have because things keep changing for women. And I think right now is a really terrifying time for women. Adriana Smith was a Black woman who unfortunately went brain dead while she was pregnant, and she recently had her baby, right? And it's chilling. It's very, very chilling to know that we are existing in a time where we are quite literally seeing people utilize women's bodies as incubators for children. And one of the things that's so terrifying to me about this is that it sets a precedent that if you're a woman who goes brain dead, or maybe you're in a coma, maybe someone impregnates you while you're in a coma, right? Your body can now be used as an incubator for a child. And unfortunately, when I listen to men talk about wanting to spread their seed and continue their legacy and things, I know that far too many men would love the idea of keeping a woman completely immobilized from the very beginning of being impregnated to the very end of having the child. And that terrifies me. That terrifies me. And I think that we are in a very scary time right now for women. At the end of the day, Sabrina Carpenter had to strike while the iron was hot. And it doesn't really matter if what she is doing is out of step or feels off to women, at the end of the day, she has to jump on the wave and capitalize on her popularity right now. That's why she released an album right after the last one did so well. I think at the end of the day, the things that are optimized to thrive under capitalism will always be out of step with things like feminism, always going to be out of step with the current political climate, or it's going to use the current political climate in order to make a lot of money. And to some degree, I think that that's what she's doing, right? She's a beautiful, white, blonde woman singing about sex. And as I said, that can be interpreted in many, 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 many ways. But what I want to know is how you interpret it. How do you guys feel about Sabrina Carpenter's new album cover? I am so curious to know how you feel, what your thoughts are. So please give me your thoughts in the comment box below. I would love to hear what you guys have to say. Do you think that it would be more empowering for her to be in the dominant role? I don't necessarily think so, but that's because I know of how bossy and shitty some submissive men can be. So I definitely don't necessarily read that as more empowered, even if superficially it is. Personally, for me, it will always feel very powerful for me to give my power to someone else, because it's not something I give for everyone, and it's something that is very personal and very important to me. So I definitely feel empowered when I'm able to give it to someone who respects my consent, but I know that everyone feels differently, and I would love to know how you feel, so please let me know in the comment box below. On that note, I will talk to you guys next time. I want to thank the last 3 people who joined me on Patreon. Shout out to Patrick Sykes Craig, Bellum Jones, and Naya. Thank you so much for joining me over on Patreon, where I post exclusive content over there. Right now, there are several private vlogs. I make vlogs about my work life, updating you guys on what's going on behind the scenes. And recently I've started to post progress videos that show where I'm at in terms of my editing schedule. And I've also been posting some comment response videos that you also can find on my YouTube members. YouTube members right now is the way that you can gain access to my comment response videos, in addition to my archive of videos that are no longer publicly available that a lot of people liked, but I didn't really necessarily want on my public facing YouTube channel anymore. So I figured that for those people who have been following me for a really long time, you can be hot and introspective and get access to my full archive. And I will actually be adding some new stuff to that archive by the time you guys get this video. So yes, on that note, I will talk to you guys next time. And as per usual, I want you to always remember and to never forget that you are beautiful and you are loved. Bye.